So, hi, I'm Jackie. I run digital analytics for Wyndham Hotels and Resorts. Oop, I have this like thing of all of us. Okay, so I put some random information about myself just because I thought it'd be fun. But so I run digital analytics for Wyndham. We're a really big hotel company. We're in 80 countries, which is kind of fun, whole kind of international experience when we're looking at our data. So I run all of the analysis for our 20 plus brand sites. We have 13 language variants. We also do all of the site performance monitoring for the customer journey analysis, segmentation, modeling for finance. And then I've also taken over some other areas since COVID, doing digital personalization. We'll be taking over A/B testing and some session replay data as well. So lots of cool stuff. I love data. I previously worked in market research and business intelligence, so kind of different areas, but all data related. I love it. And then, just in terms of like hobbies, I love to bake. I do baking on the side. If any of you need a wedding cake, you let me know. I do running, cycling, kayaking, being roped up on the side of a mountain with an ice axe. I am your girl. It's a lot of fun. And most importantly, I love data. So I have this little abacus here. I actually had one as a child, which perhaps propelled me into this career. Really enjoyed it. But so we're going to talk about Excel. So I wanted to go over like, what does Excel do? A lot of people aren't sure. They think it's just for, doing manual calculations, and there's just so much that Excel can do for you. And so I just really wanted to focus on like, what are some key things that you guys can take away that are really valuable but are easy to achieve in the tool. So the general purpose of Excel is to design spreadsheets, but that means a lot of things. So you can store data, you can perform calculations, both manual and automated. You can visualize trends directly from the data that's in there. You can create pivot tables, which is something we're going to focus on today because there's just so much bang for your buck there. So there's a lot of stuff that Excel can do, and it can get super basic and it can be extremely advanced. I've been using Excel for probably 15, 17 years, something like that. And I genuinely learn new things every day. Google is your best friend. If you don't know something, Google it. There is so much rich content out there, and they have just, if I'm ever like, oh, how could I do that with a formula? I just like type it into Google and somebody has thought of this already. So it's very helpful. But so we're just going to go over some really basic stuff that just has incredible value that you can use to really get used to the tool and start realizing benefits quickly. So why does it matter? So for me and someone who works in analytics, data is a means to an end. So data is great, and I love numbers and I love playing with graphs, but really what you're looking for is, how do I transfer data into information, and then I move that information into some sort of insight that I can use, and then from there I have to take an action. Data that's not actioned on isn't particularly useful. I think it's really important, even the most basic data about, for example, I run a website for their analytics, and so I'm looking at everything you could imagine. Like, for example, we are launching a new app. So I'm concerned about, how does this person move from the first screen to the next screen to the next screen? And is it the rate at which we expect them to move? And so being able to identify those key insights in your data and then be able to provide that recommendation to take action on it is just so important. And so that's why being able to manipulate data very quickly and bring it to life is something that I feel like you can use in any walk of life at any company. So very useful for everybody, I think. So the one thing I have to say is, in order to realize all these exciting gains, is that you have to have your data in a really clean format. So the first thing it has to be is complete. In the real world, what I will say is data, you will hear this term a lot, data is dirty. So how do I clean my data? So maybe my data doesn't have a header on top of it, or maybe I have date formats that vary from line to line. So I could, have a date format that says March 3rd written out, and I can have another one that says 3-3. numbers. And so all of those things are different. So Excel will interpret them potentially differently depending on what that looks like. So before we can really start getting into how to use Excel, we have to make sure that the data that we're using is complete. It has headers and labels. It has consistent taxonomy across the board, and the formatting should be the same for each column. So I'm going to walk you through what that would look like. So let me just flip over into Excel real quick. So I just have some raw dummy data, made this up, but I have a year column, I have month. I don't like month name, I'm just gonna type into it and say month instead. I have a product column, so A, B, C, D, and E. I have views. I figured, you know, random data, like how many people viewed this product on a website, how many people made an order for that product, and how many people in general were viewing. So I made up all this data, and so this you'll notice has really clean format. This is what we would consider a standard format. And just so you know, if you've never used Excel before at all, you can literally just type into these cells. So I'm going to just type 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you could do manual entry. You could just go in here and type whatever numbers you want, and it'll just keep logging it. And then I could highlight it and maybe pull it down and just give it a header. Test data. Or, oh, data. There we go. Whoop. Nope. Okay. So this could be test data, and you can type directly into here. Usually when you're working with data from a business, somebody will just hand you a file and it may just look really dirty. So maybe it will be missing product numbers, or the month will be a number instead of a word. And so those are the things you want to clean up in advance. There's a lot of different techniques for doing that. But for now, I just want to start with this raw data, just make it easy example, and then you can really bring that to life and what you're looking to use it for. So before we get too far, I do just want to show you some of these ribbons on the top. So when you open an Excel file, you have all these little ribbons at the top, and they kind of organize all the different options you have in the tool into meaningful groups. So the home is just sort of like basic information that you might like to do. I'm not going to get into all of the complicated stuff, but you could change the font, for example, if you wanted to make it look different. You could change the size. You could bold it, italicize, underline. This is for borders, if I wanted to like give really dark borders to my cells, something like that. I could highlight cells. If I want to highlight yellow views, I could do that. Can change the colors. So there's just a lot of formatting options that are here. This is an important one here. You'll see it says number, and if you click on this little down arrow, it's going to bring up like a box, this little widget. And so you can kind of change it in here. There's also a quick change up here. So if I wanted to say, maybe this isn't 2019, maybe it's actually 2019 visits or something, I can actually just go into here and I can say it's a number. And now all of a sudden, it's got decimal points. So there's lots of different ways that you can manipulate that data, but a lot of general stuff, formatting related, is in this home tab. If we move over to insert, this is more, we're going to get to this when we get to creating our pivot table and how to create graphs, but there's some of those options in here. Page layout, you can make margins, similar to Microsoft Word. A lot of the Microsoft tools share a lot of the functionality between them, which is kind of nice. Most of these are for printing, though. If you're going to print your spreadsheet, not something you would often do in Excel, just because you're often working with just data. You might maybe take a screenshot and print it, but you wouldn't always have to print an entire spreadsheet. The formulas one we're not going to get into today. This is a little bit more advanced, but if you're interested in learning more about this, I'll give some links at the end of the presentation where you can check out the Microsoft's website, and they have some documentation around how to create different types of formulas and just do some additional stuff that we won't cover today. There's also a data tab. So this is, you know, you can sort, you can filter. Here's things. So if I wanted to highlight my headers and say, hey, I just want to put a filter on that. And actually, I only want to see rows that are for 2019. So I'm going to uncheck the 2020 box. I would say okay. And now all of a sudden, my whole table is filtered for 2019. If I wanted to just look at 2020, I could do that. And now you'll see that my table updates and it's just 2020. So just basic filtering options there. I can also sort if I wanted to. There's different, you know, These are more cleaning up data if you had to do some work like that, so we won't get too into that. Review, this is a tab you wouldn't use often in Excel, but if you wanted to spell check your data, you could do that. There's a thesaurus option, you can translate languages, again, not super common, and then view. So if I wanted to make this larger or smaller, I could change the zoom on my thing. You can also actually change it down here in the bottom right. There's like this minus sign and a plus sign, and I can make my screen bigger or smaller. I made it a little bit bigger for you guys. You can freeze panes, things like that. But again, this is really just once you get more advanced and you're trying to really clean up your spreadsheet and make it look really user-friendly. But today we're just going to focus on how do I get a lot of value out of my data. So here's my table that I made. What I'm going to do is just highlight it. And there's many quick keys that you can leverage in Excel. I'm going to manually highlight for now for ease, but there's lots of ways that you could just like with 2 keystrokes highlight this entire table. So definitely that's the kind of stuff that once you get more advanced you'll want to do because it really helps you be more efficient. But so I just highlighted this, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to Insert, and I'm going to go to Pivot Table. And now I'm going to have this little box that shows up. And so right now it's telling me I have selected this area, which you'll see it was like highlighting it. And then I'm going to say, let's put it on a new worksheet. So you don't really have to change anything. Just say, okay. Now I have a pivot table. So before we start playing with that, I'm just going to jump back over to the presentation. And I just want to go over what is a pivot table. It is a commonly used option in Excel. It's just incredibly easy to manipulate data with. So it really helps you organize raw data. It's the #1 function that you have. It also really helps avoid manual errors. So a lot of times you might have a raw data set and you're trying to say, hey, you know, actually I want to see the months as columns instead of rows. And so people could be manually moving cells around, and that really is subject to manual error. So the great thing about pivot tables is that you don't have to do that work. It kind of does it for you. And then you have the option to slice and dice on the fly, which is really cool. So if you're just digging into your data and you're seeing interesting things, you can just filter really quickly or move things around or do breakdowns really, really fast. So I'm going to show you how to do that with our dummy data set. So I'm just going back here. I'm just going to move this over a little bit so I can see. That looks good. So I'm going to grab year. I'm just going to put year as a column. And you'll notice now on the top, we have year as columns. And then I think I'm going to look at month. So I'm going to pull this down into rows. And now all of a sudden I have a nice little table coming along. And for now, I'm just going to look at views. I just want to see how many people viewed products for each month in each of these years. So I'm going to grab products and I'm going to pop it into this value section. And you'll notice the structure of this kind of looks like that little image that I had up. You have your rows, your columns, and then we'll look at filters in a bit. So I'm going to grab my views and I'm going to pop it right into my values section. And you'll see right now it has sum. If you wanted to do a count or some other sort of a different operation other than sum, you could just click on this little arrow, go to value field settings, and then this little box pops up. So you can do a count, an average, a min, max. So there's different options that you have. For now, I'm going to leave it as sum. I personally need to see commas in my data. My brain does not work this way. So I'm just going to highlight this table here. I'm going to go to the Home tab. And then remember we talked about this formatting section. So this little button right here with the comma is actually a quick key. I'm going to click on this. Now all of a sudden I have commas, but now I have decimal points, and I don't need decimal points for numbers in the millions. So I'm going to click on this little button here. It says decrease decimal, and it has like a little image that kind of explains to you what it is. I'm just going to press that twice, and now I've removed my decimal points. Now I have this nice little table going, and it has all of my data by month. So I just want to stop real quick. Is everybody comfortable with what I just showed? Do we have any initial questions? All right, guess we're good. So the next thing I want to do is we had products in our data. So what if I wanted to know what product A looked like as opposed to product B. So there's lots of ways that you can do this. The first way I'm going to show is the most basic, and then I'll show you a fancier way to do it that looks nicer. So I'm going to grab this product field, and I am going to pop it right into my filter section. So now at the top of my pivot table, I have a little box and it says product, and then I have a drop down. So now I have each of my products. So if I wanted to filter my table for product B, I'm going to just click on product B and click OK. And now my whole table is filtered for that, which is really nice. If I wanted to maybe look at products A and B, I could click this select multiple items on the bottom, click both of the products, and then click OK. And now my table has updated for products A and B. Now I want to show you a second way to do this, which I prefer. I'm going to remove products from the filters. You can just grab it and just place it back where it came from. When you click, you'll notice when I click outside of the pivot table, my options up here go away. And I click in it, this little pivot table tools ribbon pops up. So make sure you're clicked into the pivot table, and you can click analyze. And then there's this option right here called insert slicer. So a slicer is a filter, but it's much more visual. So I'm going to click on that button. These are all of the headers that I had in my data table. And I'm just going to click product, because that's the one I want to be able to filter by. I'm going to hit OK. So now I have this fancy little slicer, and I can just click like this. And now I can see all of my data change. So if I wanted to analyze this, you know, I can look at product A, B, C apparently not looking too good. So I would say to somebody, hey, we should take a look at this product. It's not selling very well. Product D, product E, I can kind of go through each of those. Yes, we have a question. Sorry, will you review how you obtain the pivot table fields? Yes, so do you mean from the raw data, how I got the data into the pivot table? Yes, okay. So what I did was I highlighted the table. Then I clicked on Insert, Pivot Table, and then I hit OK. So that's the default. That you can put it in different places. I could put it in an existing worksheet if I wanted. Before I clicked on New Worksheet and I put it in a different tab. But if I did existing, I could just select a location. So I could hit that little image button next to it, and I can just say, hey, I want my pivot table right here. And then you can just click OK. And now my pivot table is here, and I could play with it on this screen if I wanted to. Does that help? Okay, awesome. So I'm going to hop back over to this tab that we were on, and I'm going to show you how to, now that we've kind of looked at our table and we've been able to add some slicers, what if I wanted to filter or sort? I'm sorry. So I would go to this row labels, and maybe I only want to look at January through May, because that's the only data I have that's year over year. So I have data for both 2019 and 2020. So I can click on this little drop down right here, and I'm going to unselect everything, and then I'm just going to click January, February, March, April, May. So that's one way to do the filter in here. But if I wanted to maybe sort by volume instead of by month, so I don't care what order it comes in, maybe I want to know like what months had the highest production from biggest to smallest. I can go to row labels. I'm going to go to more sort options, because you have sort A to Z, but I don't want to sort it by A to Z. I want to sort it by the numbers. So I'm going to go more sort options. Then I'm going to go by descending, by views. So from the most to the least by the number of views, which is my metric that I have on the table. I'm going to hit OK. And now all of a sudden my biggest months are at the top. So March, May, and April are my top 3 months. Ooh, one more question. Let's see. There must be a cursor. Where must the cursor be when you analyze insert slicer? Sure. So you want to make sure you're somewhere inside the pivot table. You can click anywhere in there, but just watch when I click out of it, this at the top is going to go away. So I'm going to click here, and now my my ribbon that is specific to the pivot table disappears. So I want to click back into that. Then my pivot table tool shows up, and then I would just go to Analyze and Insert Slicer. And I can pick anything. I could, you know, if I wanted to, I could pick month, even if though it's on the table. And I can say, hey, I actually only want to look at March, and then just March will show up, or I can multi-select and you'll have these. Right now I still have my sort option on there. So I can just get rid of this by hitting clear filter. Oh wait, nope, just kidding. I would go to more sort options and I would just go to manual. Just switch it back to what it came from. Wait a minute. There we go. So actually when you have something like month, Excel is kind of smart sometimes that it knows things automatically. So even though my sort option is A to Z, it recognizes that the months of the year go in a certain order, which is really nice. So if you just click on A to Z, it will go back to the standard order of the months, even though it's not actually in alphabetical order. So these are just some options we have. I'm going to get rid of this one. I'm just going to right click and remove, just so we just have one on here. And next thing I want to show you guys how to do is sort of add some additional information to our table itself. So if somebody asked me, you know, what if I wanted to see, I didn't want to see my grand totals, or I wanted to add subtotals or something, how could I do that? So I'm going to click into my table again, and you'll see that these options pop up, and I'm going to go to design this time. And in the design ribbon on the left-hand side, I have options for subtotals, grand totals, report layout, blank rows. So all of these allow me to manipulate the data directly in this table. So the first thing I'm going to do, just so I can show you what a subtotal looks like, is I'm actually going to drag product underneath month in my table. Now right now only product E is selected, but I'm going to clear that filter, and now I can see all of my products by month for each year. And you'll notice that the bolded numbers are totals for the rows, and then this column is all grand totals. So product B in January for 2019 and 2020 combined. So when we look at data this way, it might be a lot of information. So maybe people don't want to see the totals for January, they just want to see maybe the data inside of that. So there's different ways that we can do that. So go back to design, we have some options here. I can either not show subtotals at all, so I'm going to take that off, and you'll notice that the subtotals for the months went away. If I hit show all subtotals at bottom of the group, and I click that, and now my subtotals are actually in a new line, says January total at the bottom. Or I could say show all subtotals at the top of the group, and now it's just in line with the header for the month. So there's different ways that you can look at this, just play around in there, lots of different options, and really helps you organize the information if you're providing this to someone in your company and you just want to make it easier for them to read. Adding things like subtotals is just very helpful. Or if I wanted to, now again, I'm going to click inside my pivot table, go to design. Now I'm going to look at grand totals. So these are the ones on the ends here. There's a grand total for the rows, and there's a grand total for the column at the bottom. So if I click in here, I have options to turn them off for rows and columns. That'll remove the grand totals for the rows here and for the column at the bottom. So those are gone now. Then I can also put on for rows and columns. So that will bring us back to what we were looking at before. I can do on for rows only. So that'll be on this side, right? Because this is my row. So what is the total for my row is right here. And then if I just decided actually I want to look at just for the columns. Now this one on the side is going to disappear, and now just the grand total at the bottom is going to be there, which is going to be the total number of views for all of the products for all of the months. In this case, the example is 2019, and then the 21,000 is just January through May of 2020. So there's lots of different ways we can look at that. For right now, I'm going to remove my subtotals and my totals. And now I just have a table. The next thing I want to look at is report layout. So if I click on this, I have some additional options. This is all preference. I prefer to, well, it depends on what I'm doing, I guess, but you can show compact form, which is the one that you're in right now. You can do an outline form, which kind of pushes it out. It looks more like indented, might be easier to read. You can do a tabular form, and now you'll see this kind of like looks more like rows. And then we have an option for repeat all items. So you might do, this might be a more advanced thing, but if you click this, January, February, it's all going to cascade so that it has a full set in there. So if I hit this, now my entire table is complete. So if for some reason I needed to manipulate some of my data, I need to move it around, this is a really easy way to do that and kind of create like a second database in an order I like or in a format that I like that my original data wasn't in. So that's a nice option there. And then the last one is don't repeat item labels. So if I take that off, we just go back to what we were looking at before. And then there are no blank rows in this, but if there was, I could remove the blank line after each item, or if I wanted to like add a blank line in between each item, I've never used this. I don't know what the functional benefit would be. I guess I could click that, and now there's like little mini tables in between each of the months. So it kind of segments them, I guess. I'm going to take that one off. Okay, so the next thing that I think is really cool and I personally enjoy is being able to format colors and styles of the table. So if you go to the design, and again, you have to be clicked into the pivot table. If you go to the pivot table tools and click design, now I have all these colors over here, and this is only just a sampling of them. So if I want to look at all of them, I could click this little down arrow at the very bottom, and it says more. And when I do that, now I have lots of options. So if I wanted to, and you'll see as I kind of hover over, you can see the table changing. So I can pick different colors, different styles. Some have a banded effect of the data, so it kind of highlights the row headers and the column headers differently. For right now, I'm gonna pick this one. Nope, I'm gonna pick this one. That's the one we started on, isn't it? I should pick a new one. I'll do this one. Blue is very soothing, so if you're ever having to provide bad news and data, I find that blue is a nice color to use. There's actually a lot of market research to suggest that blues and lavenders are very soothing for bad news. So good way to soften the blow if the data doesn't look good. So here's an option here. You also can do this for your slicer too. If you click on the slicer, there's a slicer tools option that shows up. And you'll see here there's some colors you can pick as well. Same idea. I like this one. It has this nice gradient effect. Looks like a button that literally pops off the page, and I can just click my buttons. So this is a really, again, basic pivot table, but just so much value in how you can organize the information. Now for me, I'm going to remove product real quick. For me, one of the most important things that I look at on a day-to-day is how is my business performing throughout the year compared to how we were doing last year. So one of the best ways to do that, like, you know, I love numbers, but this is difficult to interpret if I'm just staring at a table. So how can I visualize this for, you know, my boss or for leadership so they can better understand what those trends look like and sort of visually see how performance is looking. So when I click into the pivot table again, you'll notice that the pivot table tool shows up, and I am going to click on insert. Oh, it's over here, it's hidden. I was like, where'd it go? Let me just, ooh, I can't move that. Put that right. Ooh, nope, oh boy. I don't know what's happening. Okay, sorry about that. So click into pivot tables, and then if I can just move this over, here it is. There's a pivot chart option. So I'm just gonna click on that. And this little box is gonna pop up. It's this little insert chart widget. And so it gives me different options. So there's lots of different types of graphs. What I would say is be careful about the type of graph you choose to use. They are all meant for different things, and some of them can be very confusing. So a column is best used, and I hate that they give this example because it's actually a poor example of how you should use this, but a column really is best used to, for example, look at the difference between product A and B and C. Not time series data, like how do I trend performance from January to February to March. Representing that should really be in a line chart. So we can look at that. So I'm actually gonna pick this for line. Actually, the reason why it's showing these little images is because that's the data I have selected in my table. If I had product, it would show products. But so here's my line chart, so I'll just select it off the left navigation. I also have some options up here. I can do different, like I can add little bubbles to each marker. I can change the markers, they look a little bit different. This option is interesting, three-dimensional. Not sure you need to use that. I'm gonna use the basic one, and I'm gonna hit OK. And now I have a chart, which is really cool. So Now I can actually see this data over time, right? So it looks like we have a micro spike in the year in March, right? So maybe March is one of our best months, but not the best. Then maybe we have a lull and then we come back up through the summer and then we come down into the back half of the year. So it looks like between 2019 and 2020 for this fictional business that we see very similar trends month to month, right? January, February, March, they all trend similarly, even though the data is different. But what we will say is that 2020 is performing lower than 2019. Perhaps my fictional business has been impacted by COVID. So looking at this, I can now show this to leadership, and instead of them looking at this table and just being, hit in the face with numbers, I can really see this. So this is one way we can visualize it. It's also really cool that because I attach that slicer to the pivot table that this graph is built on, I can actually just select the product. So now I can leverage the slicer that I built to actually look at my data visually. So product A is actually doing better than 2019. Product B, very similar to the aggregate. Product C looks like it hasn't been sold since March of last year, maybe February of last year. So definitely looks like it's on the downswing. Product D, significantly lower than the aggregate, and similar for product E. So when I look at all of them together, that's what's providing this trend in total. Any questions on the graph so far? All right, well, that's good. So one of the things that I like to do when I'm showing people data is I want to put more descriptions in my graph. So how do I make it easier for someone to know what they're looking at? So right now, you see some of views here, but it's not like super visible. So I can just hit this plus sign on the right, and I can actually add, oops, it's over here. I can actually add different options. So I can put a chart title on. So if I click on this, now a little chart title pops up, and I can double click on this, and now I can call it whatever I want. So I can say year over year, which is commonly abbreviated like that, or I usually use all uppercase, views by month. So now when I send this chart out, they know what I'm looking at. What I also like to do is sometimes color my charts. So if I right click on the line, this options here will pop up, and I'm just going to hit outline, and then I'm going to hit gray. So maybe I want last year to look like it's in the past, so I'm graying it out a little bit. So I'm going to grab that, and then maybe for this year, I'm going to make it a nice blue. And now we have a different color graph, and you can do this for anything. Anything in Excel is customizable by color, format, which is really nice. And I actually don't like that this is so big. I like to kind of make my graph bigger. So I can just click on it. It highlights the perimeter, and I'm just going to grab it and just pull it over to the right. And then I'm going to grab my legend, and I'm just going to pull it over here. That way now I can see more of it. Same thing on the bottom. That month thing has taken up a lot of space. So I can just move this around, play with the formatting, and really just make it easier to read. Another thing I like to do for the axes, so this is the axes label for the y-axis, is everything's in millions. I don't need to see all 6 zeros that comprise the million. So if you right-click on this and you go to Format Axis, now I have some options that pop up in this right-hand navigation. And so I can go in here and I can actually display units as millions. And when I do that, now you'll notice in my graph, it just goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and it just has the word millions next to it. That way it doesn't take up so much space. It's much more visually appealing, just easier to navigate. So we have our graph there. What I want to do is do it. I'm going to just X this out because it seems to stay up there unless I do that. The next thing I want to show you guys is I'm just going to copy this pivot table. I'm going to highlight the perimeter. I'm going to Control copy, or you can right click and copy, and then I'm just going to paste it down here. And what I'd like to do, let me just make sure. Ooh. So you'll notice that the slicer that I wanted for this one actually is connected to this one as well. We can disconnect this, but for now I'll leave it. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take months off of this I'm going to click on my bottom one, take months off of here, and then I'm going to grab product and I'm going to stick it on there. So now we can look at our product by year. And so what I'd like to do is kind of show you a different type of graph that you can use. So in this case, a line graph like we did here would not be appropriate because a line graph is really meant to show that time series data. It connects over time. But it's something like this, there's no relationship between product A and B and C. So having a line that connects them doesn't really make sense. So similar to what we did before, I'm going to click inside of the pivot table. I'm going to go up into my ribbon that is covered by this nifty little zoom thing. And I'm going to go to Analyze. And then I'm going to go to Pivot Chart. And now my options come up. So you'll see I can do a line. You'll see this little preview of the product. You see how not helpful this line graph is. It really doesn't demonstrate what it is that we're trying to look at. I want to understand, how does product A look compared to product B year over year? And so this is a good way to do that. So I'm going to leave it as a line. I'm going to hit OK. And now I have the second graph that lets me see my products year over year. I can go in and I can add that chart title again, call it year over year product views. And now I have a second chart that I can use for a presentation or whatever it is that I need. Similarly, we'll just review this again. I'm going to click on my y-axis. I'm going to hit my right-click button. I'm going to go to Format Axis, and now these options pop up again. I've got so many windows over here. And then in the axis options, you have display units, and then I'm just going to change this to millions. And that way, it looks much nicer and easier to see everything. I'm going to bump this out a little bit. Any questions so far? All right. So let me just go back to my slide real quick. I want to make sure I'm covering everything I wanted to show you guys. So we did build a table, we added a filter, sorted our data, we inserted a slicer, we changed our colors, we added and removed totals, and we worked on some graphs. Is there anything that the group is interested in learning more about that I can show you guys with the pivot tables or the data or the graphs, anything like that? I'm happy to go over. Ooh, we have a question. Formulas and functions. Okay, so formulas are a lot of fun. So I will show you, I'm going to just open a new tab actually. VLOOKUP. Yep, that is a great example of a formula. So let me just go to my, here's my raw data. I'm going to put this over here. Do formulas example. And just to know what I just did, to make a new tab, you can just hit this plus sign here. It says new sheet. And I'm going to do a formulas example tab for you guys. So let's say I have, I'm actually going to pull data from my raw data tab just so I have some data to work with. Product, and then I'm going to do views. Okay, and maybe I want to rename the product. So let's do product name. I'm just making like kind of like a lookup table for you guys. You would have this already if you were doing the VLOOKUP. I'll just show you what that function looks like and what the benefit is. So maybe product A is actually puppy, and product B is a kitten. Product C can be a walrus. I don't know how to spell platypus, but we're going to go with that. Spelling is not my thing. What's in the, we're going to go with the giraffe. I saw one on the Animal Planet this morning. Very cute. Giraffe. Oh my God. Maybe I shouldn't do that. I don't know how to spell that word. Lizard. I can spell that word. Okay, lizard. There we go. So I'm going to put product, and then I'm going to call it friendly name. So I'm just going to type my headers like I always do. Now, when you do a VLOOKUP, my headers or my information can live on the same sheet or it can be on different sheets. For the sake of showing you guys the formula, just so you can see how it works, it's easier if I do it on one sheet. So let's say I have a table and I want to know how many views a puppy got. But maybe my data set is not this simple. We're really simplifying this for the sake of getting the formula right. But maybe I don't know how many views the puppy got. So if I wanted to pull these views numbers in next to the word puppy, how would I do that? So I'm going to put an equal sign. All good things in Excel start with an equal sign. And then I'm going to type VLOOKUP. A VLOOKUP is a vertical lookup. And what it does is it looks at, and the really nice thing also about formulas in Excel is it gives you these little tooltips on what it is that you need to enter. I know it looks like a bunch of gibberish, but I will explain it. So you'll do VLOOKUP. And the first thing I want to do is I have to have a common column between the two things. So I need to connect product A with the puppy to product A with the views. So product A, in this case, is what we would call my primary key. And so it is the common link between my two tables. So I'm going to VLOOKUP, and I want to look at product A. So I'm going to click on product A. It's going to give me the cell number. That's F2. And I'm going to hit comma, because that's my lookup value. Then I'm going to do my table array. So in that case, I'm just going to highlight columns A and B together. And that's going to be my table array. So I want to look up product A in this table. And then I'm going to do comma. In this case, I'm going to do an index of 2. What that means is it's in row 2. So I want to see the value for product A in row 2, or in column 2 of this table. So this is column 1, this is column 2. If I'm looking up product A, this is the value I would see if I pulled in column 2. So I'm going to do my, again, product A, that's my lookup value, comma, the table array, comma, and then 2. That's the value, the number of columns I'm looking over. In this case, I'm going to do comma false. Now you'll notice the last statement in here is going to be either true for an approximate match or false for an exact match. I almost always use false because I'm really looking for, I want the value to be exactly product A, not product A lowercase b next to it, which might come up if I did the exact match. So I'm just going to type in false. I'm going to close out my parenthesis and I'm going to hit enter. And so now you'll see that the value for puppy, product A, matches the value in the table over here. Now you'll notice it doesn't have the same formatting. That's because the column I was typing into didn't have that formatting natively. So I'm just going to click on my little comma and I'm going to remove my decimal points like we showed before. I'm going to bold that. And now I can see that the value is the same, right? So that is the general premise of a VLOOKUP. There's definitely, other benefits of doing this. This is a very, very simple example. But if I had one spreadsheet that one of my colleagues gave me and it had all of the product numbers with names next to it, and then I had another spreadsheet with all the performance, I could combine them. So that is the way you could do that. So HLOOKUP is a horizontal lookup. So it's kind of like the opposite of V. Instead of going like this, it goes this way. It's a much more infrequently used. VLOOKUP is normal, is I'd say the most common lookup like that. Another common lookup that people use is an index match. It allows you to look backwards. So VLOOKUP is always forward looking. So when I do my formula and I'm saying this is my value I want to look up and this is the table I want to look it up in, I need to move from A over to B. So A has to be to the left, I'm sorry, the product has to be to the left of views because my lookup is moving to the right. So that's kind of how that works. Lots of different things like that. And VLOOKUP is a more advanced function. You might just be interested in how do I sum this outside of a pivot table, like super basic. So if I went down here, I could just click in my cell, going to start with my equal sign, and I'm just going to type in the word sum. And there's this preset sum value as all numbers in a range. Hit tab, and I'm just going to go like this. I'm going to highlight my range. I'm going to close out my parentheses, and I'm going to hit enter. And now I can see that the total is 4,100,000. So I can do that. Same thing if I wanted to like subtract or count, lots of different things like that. Any formula that you can think of probably exists in Excel, or it can be created in Excel. If you're creative, there's all kinds of really nifty ways that you can manipulate the options that Excel has to get to virtually anything. But if you're looking for just like, what are my options, you can go to the formulas tab in the ribbon, and then you can actually just page through it. So like, these are my auto sum options. I can do average, I can count, min, max. These are my recently used ones, I guess. I don't know when's the last time I used hyperlink, but what's the difference between count and count A? If I recall correctly, it is, one is a blank cell. Let me just see. Yeah, so, and it has this little tooltip that pops up. So equals count, counts the number of cells in a range that contains numbers. And then count A, count the number of cells in a range that are not empty. So if I were to do count, and then I'm just going to hit tab, it's going to start my parenthesis, and I'm going to count this number, right? I just highlighted 7 rows, but if I close that out, you'll notice it only shows me 6. And that's because it didn't count the blank cell. It only counts the cells with numbers. But if I did count A, so I'm just going to type next to it and manipulate that formula. Now I'm going to see, oh, not blank, just kidding. Now I'm going to put like ABC in there. Sorry about that. Now you'll see that it says 7. ABC is not a number, but it's also not blank. So that's why count A is counting it. Let me see what you said. In this, yes, so in this case, you absolutely could just do equals and then do the cell reference. I just wanted to show you a really easy example so you guys got the idea of how a VLOOKUP works. Would you suggest to use a forecast function? If so, how to use it? Guys, I'm so sorry. I keep like choking. There's different ways to forecast. There are some out-of-the-box forecast functions that you have access to. It's usually used for time series data. Let me just hop back. Let me just grab some of this data real quick, and we can make a table. Actually, we'll use my pivot table. I'm just going to grab this. Put a new tab. I'm just going to hard copy this data. So I'm going to look at, let me just do this. I'll give you highlighted. Where is it? I might have to get back to you on that. I do custom forecasting, so I don't use the out-of-the-box formulas in Adobe. Not Adobe, sorry, Microsoft Excel. But there are definitely formulas for it. I just don't use them typically. Let me see if I can figure it out real quick. Yeah, some of these are forecasting functions like IRR, MPV, but those aren't the basic ones. Well, this is a great example of how do we look this up. So forecast. I'm actually just going to go into Google. Let's figure it out together. I'm going to do forecast function Excel. Let's see what comes back. Now it's going to teach me. Let's go to easy Excel. That looks good. All right, so I have my period, my sales. So this in this case would be equivalent to my month. This would be my random numbers that I have, and this is forecast linear new month. Okay, so here's how we're going to do it. There's different types of forecasting. So in this case, a linear would not be appropriate. This is getting much more complicated because a month, like we saw in our data over here, has seasonality to it. Plotting a linear line through it would really not be helpful in terms of forecasting. But if you had data that was exponential and it was consistently rising, for example, linear function would be more appropriate. So where was that sheet I was just on? Oh, here it is. Okay, so if I wanted to do this, let's just, for the sake of making it linear, I will use my seasonal data. I'm just going to turn these into numbers. And then I'm going to put 13 as my next one, right? So I'm moving out in time. So I'm going to do equals for
is this not picking this up? Didn't we just see that in our forecast linear? Forecast or forecast linear? Okay, so let's just do forecast. So X, that's going to be is 13. Then I'm going to do my known data set, do my known X's, and this is going to be my forecasted value. So let me just format it similarly and do this. I'm going to change the color too, just so we know this is a forecasted number. So what I did here was I just typed the forecast formula, right? So if I want to know month 13, in this case, it'll probably be January of the next year, I guess. Again, linear forecasting would not be appropriate for seasonal data. To introduce seasonality into a model, it's a lot more complicated than that. But if you guys are interested, hit me up after the presentation. I can help you with custom forecasting. And so I put that 13th period number in here. So what's that next month that I haven't gotten to yet? And in my formula, that's my X. So this is what I'm trying to forecast. In my next field, what are my known Ys? So what are my known values that I'm looking to ultimately forecast the value for? And then what are my known X's? So what were the periods that came before it? And then I'm just hitting enter and I have my value. Now what I'm going to do so that I can drag this down, maybe I want to project out 19 periods. I'm going to click inside of this second range and I'm going to lock my function key on my keyboard and I'm going to click F4. And what that does is it starts to lock my cells. So the number sign that is in front of the column number or the row number means that it's locked. If that dollar sign is not there, it means that it's not locked. But by locking it, it will allow me, I'm going to lock this as well, will allow me to drag my formula down while still only referencing the original data set that was not a forecast. What you don't want to do is forecast off of your forecast. That is going to make it not helpful. So I drag that down. You'll see even down here, I'm still referencing that original data set that I had. And so now I have this. So see what it looks like. I'm going to insert. In this case, I'm just going to go to line. So very similar to what we did for a pivot table graph. But instead of using the graph option in the pivot table charts, I'm just going to do the regular line graph. And so now it looks like this. And this is exactly why it would be not appropriate. Now, the reason why the line looks like this is I'm going to right click. I'm going to add a trend line. And it's going to be a linear line because that's the forecast model that Excel does out of the box. And now you can see this little dotted line. So you'll notice that the forecast line is exactly equal to the trend line it plotted through my original data. The reason that it is on its way down is because the majority of the months had a downward trend. And you'll notice it's not as severe as the trend we had on the back half of the year because it's accounting for the fact that the data was lower in the first half of the year. So that's why, again, linear forecasting, you can do more advanced forecasting in Excel, but it has to be done with custom formulas. I'm pretty sure the out-of-the-box functionality is restricted to linear, but you can plot like a polynomial trend. You can see this little bend in the line, and you can keep, trying different things. But this really starts to get into more advanced statistics and how you would utilize different powers, for example, and different orders of the polynomial. So how do I keep making this look different? You'll notice I'm increasing the order on my polynomial function. This is really going back into college level math. So I'm moving this trend line to try to adjust for the seasonality I see in my data. So there's ways that you can do this, but I would just take a look at those basic functions first, and then as you get more advanced, you can start progressing with using different forecasting options. Any other questions? Forward-looking and backward-looking formula. Sure. So when we did our, which tab was I on? Here. When we were doing our VLOOKUP just happens to be a forward-looking formula. It's the only one I'm aware of that functions this way. But the VLOOKUP, so if I wanted to know what product A is, but I want to pull the value from this table, I always have to have product A here. I couldn't, for example, have product A on this side. And notice now, it has to look from left to right, is what I mean by forward-looking. when we say backward looking, people usually just reference that as an opposite to what a VLOOKUP does. So because VLOOKUP is forward looking, there are ways to do, for example, people will nest an index formula with a match formula so that they can basically perform the same thing as a VLOOKUP, but they can just do it from left to right. I'm sorry, from right to left. But that's nesting multiple formulas inside of itself. It's a bit more advanced. But that's basically what I mean by that. If your data is not in the right order, you could just highlight the column and like pull it over and, you know, or if it was over here, you could just pull it to the right order and then it's back and, you know, you can very easily do that. Sure. An example of index match. Sure. So if I wanted to do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide this just so it's not confusing. So I'm going to do equals index. So when we nest formulas, we're nesting them inside of each other. So I'm basically taking an index formula and then within that, I'm putting a match formula. So index match, God, I haven't done this in a long time. Let's make sure I know how to do this. Lookup value, so index match. So if I wanted to look up product A, my lookup value, my lookup array is here. And then my match type, oh gosh, I don't remember what that is. Less than 1, I did a 0. Nope, that didn't work. It's been a long time since that. Let's Google. Index match. Is combination of two, blah, 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 blah. Let's click on this. Give me an example. Ooh, these examples are not very good. Let's go to an Excel website that looks more decent. Okay, so index match. So now we have our index formula and they're going to nest it with a match formula. Okay, so in this example they're giving us, they're saying that this is the value I want to bring in. This is the whole table that I'm looking at. And then I'm going to match H2, which is the ID over here, with the array that's over here and hit 0. So let's go back to our Excel. So we'll do, clear this out, do equals index. And now what's our array that we are going to use? So in this case, we want to pull in that visit number that we talked about before, comma, match. And then let's go back to our example, match, and then we're going to look for the ID. So in our case, it's going to be product A, and then comma, the values that are in the table. So, oops. I'm going to go back here, comma, I'm going to do product A, lookup value, and then here's my lookup array. And then they had 0 for an exact match, and here's my value. And you notice it's the exact same thing that VLOOKUP gave me, but it's doing it a different way. So now I have my index. Again, I'm looking at what is that list of values I want to eventually pull into the table I'm looking at. And then here is my match formula. So I'm looking at product A, that's what I want to match into this table. And then I'm looking at what is that array of options that are in here. And then 0 is the exact match, similar to false in the VLOOKUP. Any other questions? Oh, so the purpose of index matching, again, there's so many different ways to do the exact same thing in Excel. Some of them are easier than others. Index match just helps that if I had a huge database and I didn't have the luxury of just grabbing my column and moving it to where I wanted it to be, if it was just like too much stuff to deal with, I could do an index match instead and look backwards as opposed to forwards, that right to left versus the left to right lookup. This is again just, index match is an example of getting creative with Excel. It's a way to nest multiple formulas inside of each other to achieve something that a single formula is unable to do. Any other questions? All right, well, that's all I had for you guys. You are certainly welcome to reach out. I'm happy to answer any questions. This is my email address. Ooh, let me move this out of the way so you guys can see, jackie.destacy@wyndham.com. So feel free to email me anytime. Happy to help with questions. And then I just put some resources here.